Blink TV presents Mosaic World News from the Middle East. Here are today's top stories.
Bosniaks hold another mass funeral on the 17th anniversary of the Srebrenica Massacre. Bahraini activists rally in solidarity with Saudi protesters. And suicide attack targeting police academy kills 25 in Yemen. Mosaic World News from the Middle East begins now. Today marks the 17th anniversary of the massacre that occurred in the city of Srebrenica in Bosnia and Herzegovina. The remains of over 500 newly identified victims of the massacre will be reburied in the Potakari Memorial Center in the city. Bosnia declared a day of mourning today. It is worth mentioning that Bosnian Serb leaders Ratko Mladic and Radovan Karadzic, who are accused of masterminding the massacre, are currently being tried by the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia at The Hague. Both deny the allegation.
Being carried on their shoulders is one of the victims of the Srebrenica massacre that happened 17 years ago. This is one of 520 bodies that were recently found. This man is searching for one of his relatives.
I came to honor our brothers who were killed here. It is very difficult for me to even talk. I'm very sad.
As for those who did not find their loved ones, their sadness is renewed. The victims' remains were transported to the site of the massacre after being found in different mass graves. The remains will be buried in an honorary ceremony marking the annual anniversary of the massacre that claimed the lives of 8,000 Muslim men and boys who were killed by Bosnian Serbs.
The oldest human right is...
It is a human right to be properly buried, and this is why we came to Srebrenica.
Over the past 3 days, a number of people traveled the road taken by the men and boys in their attempt to flee from Bosnian Serb forces. This will not just be a commemoration of the Srebrenica massacre, but a mass funeral procession for the victims who were deprived of a decent burial. Bahrain's revolutionaries called for organizing marches across the country in solidarity with Saudi martyrs and Sheikh al-Nimr, who was detained by the authorities under the banner, "From Al-Qatif to Bahrain, we are one people, not two."
Bahrain's revolutionaries raised caskets of al-Qatif's martyrs during a symbolic funeral organized by the revolution's youth in the towns of Al-Deya and Karzakan. Thousands of Bahrainis participated in the procession held in solidarity with their brothers in Saudi Arabia. The assassination attempt and arrest of Sheikh al-Nimr impacted the residents of the region, with Bahrainis erupting and taking to the street across the country's provinces. They chanted for the Saudi and Bahraini people's right to self-determination by choosing their representatives. In the village of Al-Duraz, mourning was announced for the martyrs of the eastern province, with commercial stores shutting down and turning lights off. The Saudi occupation-backed Bahraini forces did not approve of this show of solidarity, so they flooded residential areas with tear gas and fired pellets at demonstrators. The forces also raided homes and arrested their residents. Bahrain's February 14th coalition carried out a campaign called al-Nimr operation by unexpectedly shutting down over 60 vital roads. The most notable were roads leading to the Safriya Palace, Bahrain's international airport, and the diplomatic areas. In a statement by the coalition, activists confirmed the action was organized as part of the popular solidarity campaign with the Saudis, in condemnation of the authorities' crackdown and systematic killings, and in loyalty to the Imam of Al-Awamiyya Mosque, Sheikh Nimr al-Nimr.
Tribal leaders meet the northern Yemeni province of Sada to discuss U.S. intervention in their country. Participants are trying to come up with a unified stance against American violations of Yemeni sovereignty. More than 2,000 social and political figures from different provinces joined the tribal leaders. The two-day meeting will also focus on the current political situation of Yemen and dangers threatening the country's future. Meanwhile, at least 25 people have been killed and dozens more injured when a bomber blew himself up in the Yemeni capital, Sana'a. A security official says the explosion occurred at the entrance of a police academy. He says most of the casualties were police cadets. There's been no immediate claim of responsibility for the attack. The blast is the second deadliest in Sana'a since President Abdurrahman Mansur Hadi took power in February in a single candidate vote. Back in May, an explosion killed more than 100 Yemeni soldiers and wounded more than 300 others in the capital. Mounting tension in Saudi Arabia following the arrest of prominent Shia cleric Sheikh Nimr al-Nimr in the eastern region. People in the city of al-Awamiyya are planning to hold a funeral for a man killed as he was protesting the Sheikh's arrest. Saudi forces shot and killed Akbar Hassan Shahouri and two others during the protest. On Sunday, regime forces fired at Sheikh al-Nimr's car and took him away wounded. His detention has only intensified protests. The eastern region's become the scene of anti-regime demonstrations since last year. Protesters want political prisoners to be let out of jail, and they are demanding social justice. On to Pakistan. A bomb explosion there has hit a bus carrying workers of the National Space Agency. One person as a result has been killed, with many others injured. Our correspondent Mohammed Turi gave us the details.
A bunch of space researchers, actually, these workers were working in the space laboratory in the country, and the bus was carrying them. According to the officials, it was carrying these workers back to the homes, and at the place called Much in the it was hit, and the bomb was planted in a bicycle. When the bus came near to the bicycle, somebody from some distance who was controlling the through the remote control exploded the device, and the unfortunate incident took place there. And one person, he at the spot died, and 5 critically injured in that incident, and over 20 were shifted in the nearby hospitals and then shifted into the central hospital of the city, civil hospital, and some other sites.
In Russia, Syria's head of the Opposition National Council has admitted his shortcomings, as Sergei Lavrov called on the opposition to unite and engage in a dialogue with the government.
Following talks with the Russian foreign minister, the head of the opposition Syrian National Council, Abdelbas al-Saida, admitted to his shortcomings. Saida said the council has failed to convince the Russian side to change its position on the Syrian crisis. During a joint conference with the former head of the Syrian National Council, Burhan Ghalioun, Saida said Russian support for President Bashar al-Assad's regime is allowing the violence in Syria to continue.
We have made it very clear that any solution in Syria must start with the departure of Bashar al-Assad and his cronies. The Russians said they are not clinging to Bashar al-Assad or the regime's repressive institutions, and that they respect the will of the Syrian people. But when we go into detail, we see the difference in the positions and goals. We called on the Russian side to push for a Security Council resolution under Chapter 7 of the UN Charter.
For his part, Ghalioun said there has been no change in the Russian position.
Even if Russia changes its position and becomes more positive, it will not force Bashar al-Assad to relinquish power. What we know for sure is that Bashar al-Assad will fight to the end and will destroy the country. So the Syrian people have no choice but to wage a battle for liberation.
غير أن لافروف اكتفى بتكرار الموقف الروسي القائل بضرورة بذل كل ما يمكن.
Lavrov reaffirmed the Russian position, stressing the importance of exerting all necessary means to hold a dialogue between the government and all opposition groups, in which the Syrian people determine their country's fate and work towards a transition process. He also called on the opposition to unite and engage in a dialogue with the Syrian government in order to achieve self-determination. Briefly after holding talks with Saida and Ghalioun, Moscow announced that it will continue to supply the Syrian government with anti-aircraft defense systems, which are strictly related to defense. In the same context, the Syrian Foreign Ministry's official spokesman, Jihad Maqdisi, said that tremendous efforts are underway to end the violence and implement the first article of the plan of UN Arab envoy to Syria, Kofi Annan. Al-Maqdisi added that the follow-up committee is in constant contact with the International Observers team, led by General Robert Mood. By the same token, Mood is maintaining contact with opposition groups in a bid to end the violence.
لوقف العنف. هذا وقد أطلع أنان مجلس الأمن في جلسة مغلقة وعبر الأقمار الصناعية على نتائج.
At a closed session and via satellite, Annan briefed the UN Security Council on the outcome of his recent visits to Syria, Iran, and Iraq. The Iranian official news agency quoted the Iranian deputy foreign minister, saying that armed terrorist groups in Syria are working in coordination with some foreign countries. The Iranian official told Kofi Annan the focus must be shifted to Syria's borders in order to prevent arms smuggling from neighboring countries, which will help restore stability and normalcy in Syria. On the ground, clashes broke out between army defectors and security forces across various regions in Damascus and its countryside. The Syrian forces also stormed Kafr Sousa, Al-Hakma neighborhood, and Al-Zaytun Street in Al-Kalamoun. The Syrian Observatory for Human Rights said fierce battles erupted in the Damascus neighborhoods of Al-Qadam and Al-Fahama and in Sabina. In the countryside of Damascus, a fleet of tanks from the Syrian Army's 4th Armored Division were seen mobilizing to Sahyana in the western region. As seen in this video, the armed opposition was able to destroy one of the tanks.
The Egyptian street is in a tug-of-war, as the famous Tahrir Square in central Cairo was the focal point of a protest by dozens of supporters of the Egyptian president's decree. On the other hand, a demonstration was held in the suburbs of Nasser City in support of the Constitutional Court's decision to overrule the presidential decree. Meanwhile, some are demanding that the Egyptian presidency hold 2 referendums, one on the resumption of the People's Assembly and another to abolish the Constitutional Declaration. Tawfiq Ahmed reports from Cairo.
In between the pulling and the pushing and the fluctuations, the situation in Egypt is unclear. The country's latest cries are over the Supreme Constitutional Court's verdict, halting the implementation of President Mohamed Morsi's decision to reinstate parliament. Only one session after it was reconvened, Parliament Speaker Saad al-Khatani referred the former constitutional decision to dissolve the Assembly to the Court of Cassation so it can decide on the validity of its members.
We are now facing a political, constitutional, and legal crisis between 2 of the state's most important authorities. The first is the judicial authority, headed by the Constitutional Court, and the second is the executive power, headed by the President of the Republic, Dr. Mohamed Morsi. I believe the Constitutional Court and its ruling must be implemented first on the basis of respect for the rule of law. So, either each of them work on implementing the decisions and provisions, or the executive authority can implement its own decisions in violation of the judicial rulings and cause a very violent crisis between the judicial and the executive authorities.
In Angry reactions were expressed in Tahrir Square, where dozens chanted against the constitutional decision and held a sit-in in support of the president's decision to reinstate the People's Assembly.
President Morsi's decision is the right decision.
I think the court of the judiciary is not an independent authority. It is an authority that is controlled by the regime or by whoever is in power.
On the other hand, groups of protesters gathered in Nasser City to show approval of the verdict. They were overwhelmingly happy and in agreement with other Egyptians.
The Supreme Constitutional Court's decision to invalidate the People's Assembly is wise, because a verdict was issued before, and it invalidated Parliament, and the President of the Republic should have implemented that decision.
Since the decision was final, it's not permissible for anyone to even discuss it.
While the political situation is ambiguous, President Morsi called for invoking the people by holding a referendum on whether or not Parliament should be reinstated, and another on abolishing the constitutional declaration. Amid a heated political atmosphere, an intense legal battle, and mixed reactions, it seems the stability that lasted only a few days after Morsi assumed the presidency is part of the past, as turmoil has made a comeback on the political and judicial arenas. Tawfiq Ahmed, Dubai TV, Cairo.
One day following the court's acquittal of former Prime Minister Ehud Olmert on 2 strong indictments, it appears the verdict will have further ramifications. The state prosecutor's office is now debating whether to proceed with alleged bribery charges against Olmert in connection with the alleged Holy Land real estate scandal. IBA's Eli Wagalanter has more on the story.
Shockwaves from yesterday's verdict in the cases brought against former Prime Minister Ehud Olmert continue to reverberate today. In light of the acquittal verdict and the most serious charges brought against Olmert, the state attorney's office announced today that it will not seek a jail sentence for Olmert's conviction for breach of trust, and it is also set to close another case against the former prime minister for lack of public interest. Sentencing for the conviction over breach of trust in the so-called investment center case is set for September, and prosecutors say they will not seek a jail term, in part because there are no precedents for prison terms to be handed down for similar offenses. Prosecutors are also set to close the ongoing case in which Olmert has not yet been charged over alleged illegal appointments of political cronies when he held a series of ministerial positions, including industry minister and communications minister. Olmert is still on trial over alleged bribery in the Holy Land real estate affair. In the aftermath of yesterday's developments, government prosecutors are so apprehensive of sustaining another loss in court that they are also debating whether to proceed with bribe charges against Olmert in the alleged Holy Land scandal. Deputy Attorney General Raz Nizri told Army Radio today that the state prosecutor's office would review the 743-page court decision before deciding whether to drop the Holy Land case or proceed to trial. But the man on the hot seat today is State Attorney Moshe Lador. Despite calls for him to resign, Lador said today that he had no intention of stepping down and rejected criticism that acquittal in 2 of the cases constitutes a failure. Friends of Olmert and MKs from the Kadima party, which he formerly headed, had attacked Lador in the state attorney's office, accusing him of making a standing Israeli prime minister resign on charges that ended up being largely baseless. Lador said that he had to serve the indictments, given the facts of the case. He stressed that political considerations should not influence legal decisions. Eli Wagalanter, IBA News.
A High Court hearing on the future of the Migron outpost has been delayed by 2 weeks after state attorneys asked the judges for additional time to respond to an appeal submitted by residents of the Migron outpost. The settlers had petitioned the High Court last week to issue an interim injunction preventing the state from carrying out the slated evacuation of their illegal West Bank community. Settlers claim they recently purchased all property rights from the Palestinians according to law, thereby paving the way for legal construction in the area. The High Court had previously ruled that the outpost must be completely evacuated by the 1st of August.
Israeli occupation forces released detained athlete Mahmoud al-Sarsak in implementation of the agreement that ended his hunger strike that lasted nearly 100 days in exchange for his release. Al-Sarsak received a hero's welcome in the Gaza Strip.
The released athlete Mahmoud al-Sarsak was transported to Gaza in an ambulance after he was released at the Bet Hanun crossing, the same crossing from which Israeli occupation forces arrested him 3 years ago as he was on his way to train in a soccer club in the West Bank. It is this patient mother's right to unleash her happiness. She is proud of her son Mahmoud, who set a record number of days on a hunger strike in the occupation's prison. His strike lasted almost 100 days in protest of his arbitrary detention without a trial. Mahmoud al-Sarsak seemed elated in the hospital room, where doctors checked his health condition.
I am physically with you, but my soul and my heart are with my brothers who are on hunger strike and my sick brothers in Ramleh Hospital. I cannot describe the happiness I feel, but all I can do is thank God.
At Al-Shifa Hospital, hundreds of Palestinians came to salute Mahmoud, whose name is now engraved on the list of those who patiently resisted their occupiers.
We will not abandon our prisoners. We will not leave them to die a slow death, and we will not allow Israel to manipulate them and control their lives. The prisoners' case is our main priority, and we will put all of our efforts into it, locally, regionally, and internationally.
The release of formerly detained athlete Mahmoud al-Sarsak is considered a new victory in the battle of the Palestinian prisoners' resistance against the Israeli warden. But this does not imply an end to the suffering of the rest of the hunger strikers, as Palestinian prisoners Akram al-Rakawi and Samir al-Barq are continuing their open-ended hunger strike in an attempt to attain their humanitarian demands. Tamera Michel, Al Jazeera, Gaza, Palestine.
The views expressed on Mosaic are from contributing broadcasters, not Link TV or its sponsors. The production of Mosaic is made possible by grants from the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation, the Wincoat Foundation, the Firedoll Foundation, and by support of viewers like you. Thank you. Watch Mosaic World News online. Stay up to date with breaking news, read our blog, get transcripts of past shows, and more at linktv.org/mosaic. Airwaves, a global channel of uncompromising stories, world news, documentaries, entertainment, and culture. Link TV, connecting you to the world. For more information, visit linktv.org.